Digging deep to shatter illusions. If you're not sure you want the answer, then you better not ask me the question. Okay, so welcome back to part 3. And quick review on Shattering Illusion, or from Shattering Illusions part 2. I want to remind you about David Todashini Trent. If you are not familiar with part 2, I recommend you go back and check it out. But David Trent, a quote-unquote QAnon influencer, and yes, there was Q. There are the Anons, and yes, there is QAnon. There again, go back to part 2, and I think I even might have mentioned it in part 1. But David Trent is a registered sex offender with a proclivity for an 8-year-old boy, according to the charges. All that information is in part 1 and part 2. Also, Timothy Christopher Holmseth of the High Command fame, dealing with the alleged Pentagon pedophile task force, has also been accused of having inappropriate contact via text with a 13-year-old girl. Again, all that information is in previous episodes. I discussed Field McConnell, and the reason that he is doing jail time was because of his involvement with Timothy Holmseth and making death threats. They also try to claim that Jenny Moore is not dead, but is part of the Pentagon Pedophile Task Force, or President's Pedophile Task Force. Either way. Anyway, as it turns out, no, she is dead. And at the hearing, the court hearing, bond hearing for Phil McConnell after he was extradited to Florida, yeah, that's when it was revealed that he was being charged with making death threats. If you'll go back there, you'll see that there is more evidence of deception within the community dealing with Todashini. And also, Phil McConnell straight up said, after being arrested, he revealed that the Pentagon Pedophile Task Force is bogus. And he specializes in conspiracy theories like MH370 and a few other things. So, Abel Danger. He kind of went off the rails with Timothy Holmseth. But, yeah. Again, if you'll go back over to part 2, you'll see the videos that go with this stuff. And there's just a lot more to it. In fact, I have some more information that I'm going to present to you right now. I've got a clip from John Stockwell, a former CIA officer and information specialist, information manipulation specialist, as well as some clips from Yuri Bezmenov. And after that, I am going to end up revisiting why I think Q and QAnon are part of a PsyOp. I have mentioned 4chan in the past, and that being where Q got its start, but we will readdress that after you take in these clips I have lined up. I hope you enjoy them. Please stick with them, and I hope you learned something.
John, you were in Vietnam for the CIA, and as I understand, you were up country. What years were you there?
73 to 75, right after the troop evacuation, and I came out in the evacuation of April of 75.
How long were you with the CIA?
13 years. I was a field case officer, served in Africa and Vietnam, and then eventually on a subcommittee of the National Security Council in Washington.
You were in Angola, were you not?
Well, I ran the Angolan covert action, but I ran it from Washington. These things are global, and as chief of the Angola task force, my office was in Washington.
Let's talk about the function of the CIA. I think a lot of us have an impression that all the CIA does is gather intelligence. Intelligence is information, of course. Now, one would think that if you obtained information, it was based upon fact, and if that is so, what did you do with it?
Well, one of the four principal functions of the CIA is to gather intelligence and ideally forward it to the president, the users of information, the policymakers, as they say. There are other functions, however, some of them more legitimate than others. One is to run secret wars, the covert action that's written and talked about so much, like what's happening in Nicaragua today from Honduras. Another thing is to disseminate propaganda to influence people's minds, and this is a major function of the CIA. And unfortunately, of course, it overlaps into the gathering of information. You have contact with a journalist, you will give him true stories, you'll get information from him, you'll also give him false stories.
Did you buy his confidence with true stories?
You buy his confidence and set him up. We've seen this happen recently with Jack Anderson, for example, who has his intelligence sources, and he has also admitted that he's been set up by them. Every fifth story just simply being false. You also work on their human vulnerabilities to recruit them in a classic sense, to make them your agent so that you can control what they do, so you don't have to set them up sort of, by putting one over on them. So you can say, here, plant this one next Tuesday.
Can you do this with responsible reporters?
Yes, the Church Committee brought it out in 1975, and then Woodward and Bernstein put an article in Rolling Stone a couple of years later. 400 journalists cooperating with the CIA, including some of the biggest names in the business, to consciously introduce the stories into the press.
Well, give me a concrete example of how you use the press this way, how a false story is planted and how you got it published.
Well, for example, in my war, the Angola war that I helped to manage, 1/3 of my staff was propaganda. Ironically, it's called covert action inside the CIA. Outside, that means the violent part. I had propagandists all over the world, principally in London, Kinshasa, and Zambia. We would take stories which we would write and put them in the Zambia Times, and then pull them out and send them to a journalist on our payroll in Europe. But his cover story, you see, would be that he had gotten them from his stringer in Lusaka, who had gotten them from the Zambia Times. We had the complicity of the government of Zambia, Kenneth Kaunda, if you will, to put these false stories into his newspapers. But after that point, the journalists, Reuters and AFP, the management was not witting of it. Now, our contact man in Europe was, and we pumped just dozens of stories about Cuban atrocities, Cuban rapists. In one case, we had the Cuban rapists caught and tried by the Ovimbundu maidens who had been their victims, and then we ran photographs that made almost every newspaper in the country of the Cubans being executed by the Ovimbundu women who supposedly had been their victims.
But these were fake photos?
Oh, absolutely. We didn't know of one single atrocity committed by the Cubans. It was pure, raw, false propaganda to create an illusion of communists, eating babies for breakfast and that sort. Totally false propaganda.
These were fake photos?
Oh, absolutely. We didn't know of one single atrocity committed by the Cubans. It was pure, raw, false propaganda to create an illusion of communists, eating babies for breakfast and that sort. Totally false propaganda.
Another thing which I had to sometimes risking my life to explain to foreigners. Time magazine, for example, is very critical of South African racist regime. The whole article was dedicated to the shameful internal passport system where blacks are not allowing to live with whites. For some strange reason, for the last 14 years since my defection, nobody wanted to pay attention to my passport. This is my passport. It also shows my nationality, and it has a police rubber stamp, which is called propiska in Russian language, which assigns me to a certain area of residence. I cannot leave that area, same way as this black man cannot leave the area in South Africa. Yet we call South African government racist regime. Not a single Jane Schmonda or Fonda is brave enough, courageous enough to come to media and say, look, this is what happens in USSR. I send a copy of my passport to many American liberals and civil rights defenders and all the other useful idiots. They never bothered to answer me back. This shows what kind of integrity, what kind of honesty these people are. They're a bunch of hypocrites because they don't want to recognize a good example of racism in my country. The KGB was even curious about this gentleman. It may look innocent. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, a great spiritual leader, or maybe a great charlatan and crook, depending on from which side you are looking at him. Beatles were trained at his ashram in Hardwar in India how to meditate. Mia Farrow and other useful idiots from Hollywood visited his school, and they returned back to United States absolutely zonked out of their minds with marijuana, hashish, and crazy ideas of meditation. To meditate, in other words, to isolate oneself from the current social and political issues of your own country. To get into your own bubble, to forget about troubles of the world. Obviously, KGB was very fascinated with such a beautiful school, such a brainwashing center for stupid Americans. I was dispatched by the KGB to check what kind of VIP Americans attend this school.
That's you on the left.
Yes, I'm on the left. I was trying to get enrolled in that school. Unfortunately, the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi asked too much. He wanted $500 American for enrollment. But my function was not actually to get enrolled in the school. My function was to discover what kind of people from United States attend this school. And we discovered that yes, there are some influential members of family, public opinion makers of United States who come back with the crazy stories about Indian philosophy. Indians themselves look upon them as idiots, useful idiots. To say nothing about KGB, who looked at them as extremely naive, misguided people. Obviously, a VIP, say a wife of a congressman or a prominent Hollywood personality, after being trained in that school, is much more instrumental in the hands of manipulators of public opinion and KGB than a normal person who understands, who looks through this type of fake religious training.
Why would they be more susceptible to manipulation?
I just mentioned that because you see, a person who is too much involved in introspective meditation. You see, if you carefully look what Maharishi Mahesh Yogi is teaching to Americans, is that most of the problems, most of the burning issues of today can be solved simply by meditating. Don't rock the boat. Don't get involved. Just sit down, look at your navel and meditate. And the things, due to some strange logic, due to cosmic vibration, will settle down by themselves. This is exactly what the KGB and Marxist-Leninist propaganda wants from Americans, to distract their opinion, attention, and mental energy from real issues of United States into a non-issues, into a non-world, non-existent harmony. Obviously, it's more beneficial for the Soviet aggressors to have a bunch of duped Americans than Americans who are self-conscious, healthy, physically fit, and alert to the reality. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi obviously is not on the payroll of the KGB. But whether he knows it or not, he contributes greatly to demoralization of American society. And he's not the only one. There are hundreds of those gurus who come to your country to capitalize on naivete and stupidity of Americans. It's a fashion. It's a fashion to meditate. It's a fashion not to be involved. So obviously, you can see that if KGB were that curious, if they paid my trip to Hardwar, if they assigned me to that strange job, obviously they were very much fascinated. They were convinced that that type of brainwashing is very efficient and instrumental in demoralization of the United States. The immediate impulse to defect was Bangladesh crisis, which was described by American correspondents as Islamic grassroots revolution, which is absolute baloney. There was nothing to do with Islam, and there was no grassroots revolution. Actually, there are no grassroots revolutions, period. Any revolution is a byproduct of a highly organized group of conscientious and professional organizers, but has nothing to do with grassroots.
Well, you spoke several times before about ideological subversion. That is a phrase that I'm afraid some Americans don't fully understand. When the Soviets used the phrase ideological subversion, what do they mean by it?
Ideological subversion is the process which is legitimate, overt, and open. You can see it with your own eyes. All you have to do, all American mass media has to do, is to unplug their bananas from their ears, open up their eyes, and they can see it. There is no mystery. There is nothing to do with espionage. I know that espionage intelligence gathering looks more romantic. It sells more deodorants through the advertising, probably. That's why your Hollywood producers are so crazy about James Bond type of thrillers. But in reality, the main emphasis of the KGB is not in the area of intelligence at all. According to my opinion and opinion of many defectors of my caliber, only about 15% of time, money, and manpower is spent on espionage as such. The other 85% is a slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow, and it's divided in 4 basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate one generation of students in the country of your enemy, exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism, American patriotism. The result you can see. Most of the people who graduated in the 60s, dropouts or half-baked intellectuals, are now occupying the positions of power in the government, civil service, business, mass media, educational system. You are stuck with them. You cannot get rid of them. They are contaminated. They are programmed to think and react to certain stimuli in a certain pattern. You cannot change their mind, even if you expose them to authentic information, even if you prove that white is white and black is black, you still cannot change the basic perception and the logic of behavior. In other words, these people, the process of demoralization is complete and irreversible. To get rid society of these people, you need another 20 or 15 years to educate a new generation of patriotically minded and common sense people who would be acting in favor and in the interests of United States society.
And yet these people who've been programmed and, as you say, in place and
Yes.
who are favorable to an opening with the Soviet concept, these are the very people who would be marked for extermination in this country?
Most of them, yes. Simply because the psychological shock when they will see in future what the beautiful society of equality and social justice means in practice, obviously they will revolt. They will be very unhappy, frustrated people. And the Marxist-Leninist regime does not tolerate these people. They will join the links of dissenters, dissidents.
Yes.
Unlike in present United States, there will be no place for dissent in future Marxist-Leninist America. Here you can get popular like Daniel Ellsberg and filthy rich like Jane Fonda for being dissident, for criticizing your Pentagon. In future, these people will be simply squashed like cockroaches. Nobody is going to pay them nothing for their beautiful, noble ideas of equality. This they don't understand, and it will be a greatest shock for them, of course. The demoralization process in the United States is basically completed already. For the last 25 years. Actually, it's overfulfilled, because demoralization now reaches such areas where previously not even Comrade Andropov and all his experts would even dream of such a tremendous success. Most of it is done by Americans to Americans, thanks to lack of moral standards. As I mentioned before, exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him concentration camp, he will refuse to believe it until he is going to receive a kick in his fat bottom. When a military boot crashes his balls, then he will understand, but not before that. That's the tragic of the situation of demoralization. So basically America is stuck with demoralization, and unless, even if you start right now, here, this minute, you start educating new generation of Americans, it will still take you 15 to 20 years to turn the tide of ideological perception of reality back to normalcy and patriotism. The next stage is destabilization. This time, subverter does not care about your ideas and the patterns of your consumption. Whether you eat junk food and get fat and flabby, doesn't matter anymore. This time, and it takes only from 2 to 5 years to destabilize a nation. What matters is essentials: economy, foreign relations, defense systems. And you can see it quite clearly that in some areas, in such sensitive areas as defense and economy, the influence of Marxist-Leninist ideas in the United States is absolutely fantastic. I could never believe it 14 years ago when I landed in this part of the world that the process will go that fast. The next stage, of course, is crisis. It may take only up to 6 weeks to bring a country to the verge of crisis. You can see it in Central America now. And after crisis, with a violent change of power, structure, and economy, you have so-called the period of normalization. It may last indefinitely. Normalization is a cynical expression borrowed from Soviet propaganda. When the Soviet tanks moved into Czechoslovakia in '68, Comrade Brezhnev said, "Now the situation in brotherly Czechoslovakia is normalized." This is what will happen in the United States if you allow all these schmucks to bring the country to crisis, to promise people all kind of goodies and the paradise on earth, to destabilize your economy, to eliminate the principle of free market competition, and to put a big brother government in Washington, D.C., with benevolent dictators like Walter Mondale, who will promise lots of things, never mind whether the promises are fulfillable or not. He will go to Moscow to kiss the bottoms of new generation of Soviet assassins, never mind. He will create false illusions that the situation is under control. Situation is not under control. Situation is disgustingly out of control. Most of the American politicians, media, and educational system trains another generation of people who think they are living at a peacetime. False. United States is in the state of war, undeclared total war against the basic principles and the foundations of this system. And the initiator of this war is not Comrade Andropov, of course. It's the system however ridiculous it may sound, the world communist system or the world communist conspiracy, whether I scare some people or not, I don't give a hoot. If you are not scared by now, nothing can scare you. But you don't have to be paranoid about it. What actually happens now, that unlike myself, you have literally several years to live on unless the United States wake up. The time bomb is ticking. With every second, the disaster is coming closer and closer. Unlike myself, you will have nowhere to defect to, unless you want to live in Antarctica with penguins. This is it. This is the last country of freedom and possibility.
Okay, so what do we do? What is your recommendation to the American people?
Well, the immediate thing that comes to my mind is, of course, there must be a very strong national effort to educate people in the spirit of real patriotism, number one. Number two, to explain them the real danger of socialist, communist, whatever, welfare state, big brother government. If people will fail to grasp the impending danger of that development, nothing ever can help United States. You may kiss goodbye to your freedom, including freedoms to homosexuals, to prison inmate. All this freedom will vanish, evaporate in 5 seconds, including your precious lives. The second thing, the moment at least part of United States population is convinced that the danger is real, they have to force their government. And I'm not talking about sending letters, signing petitions, and all this beautiful, noble activity. I'm talking about forcing United States government to stop aiding communism. So two very simple, maybe too simplistic answers or solutions, but nevertheless, they are the only solutions. Educate yourself, understand what's going on around you. You are not living at the time of peace. You are in a state of war, and you have precious little time to save yourself.
These were fake photos?
Oh, absolutely. We didn't know of one single atrocity committed by the Cubans. It was pure, raw, false propaganda to create an illusion of communists, eating babies for breakfast and that sort of totally false propaganda.
So two very simple, maybe too simplistic answers or solutions, but nevertheless, they are the only solutions. Educate yourself, understand what's going on around you. You are not living at the time of peace. You are in a state of war, and you have precious little time to save yourself.
All right, so this is where I was saying that things are going to get interesting. This is the next article that we're going to be looking at. Because, yes, I have been saying for the last few weeks now, bringing all kinds of evidence, and I will put together another piece, another chapter of shattering illusions on the whole Q thing. Now, I have heard arguments that there are Qs and there are Anons, but there's no such thing as QAnon. Well, guess what, peeps? There's Q, which in my opinion is a PsyOp. There are Anons. Those are the ones who actually do the digging and find the information. So I guess technically I could be considered an Anon, but I'm not anonymous. I like to speak my voice. And then there's QAnon. So 3 conspiracy theorists took Q and sparked QAnon, pushing the theory onto bigger platforms proved to be the key to QAnon's spread and the originator's financial gain. The originator's financial gain. Let me read that headline and subheadline again. how 3 conspiracy theorists took Q and sparked QAnon, pushing the theory onto bigger platforms provided or proved to be the key to QAnon's spread and the originator's financial gain. For those, let's just look at this. Okay, this article is dated August 14th, 2018, and as you can see, it is from NBC News. In November 2017, a small-time YouTube video creator and 2 moderators of the 4chan website, one of the most extreme message boards on the internet, band together and plucked out of obscurity an anonymous and cryptic post from the many conspiracy theories that populated the website's message board. Over the next several months, they would create videos, a Reddit community, a business, and an entire mythology based off the 4chan posts of Q, the pseudonym of a person claiming to be a high-ranking military officer. The theory they espoused would become QAnon. One word, QAnon. Differentiating Q, Anons, and then this thing, QAnon. And it would eventually make its way from those message boards to national media stories and the rallies of President Trump. Now, the people behind that effort are at the center of a fractious debate among conspiracy enthusiasts, some of whom believe the 3 people who first popularized the QAnon theory are promoting it in order to make a living. Others suggest that these original followers actually wrote Q's mysterious posts. There's reasons why I'm bringing this up. And I'm going to stop it right there because, yeah, I'm going to introduce you to somebody and then I want to play a little clip for you. And then we're going to find out who this guy is. Hang on just a moment. Let me get that lined up for you.
And speaking of January 6 hysterics, we're learning exclusively tonight about what's going on inside the FBI. Well, whistleblowers have told Congressman Jim Jordan that the agency is in full-blown retaliation mode, referring to what's going on as a purge of agency employees who hold conservative views. One employee reportedly had his security clearance taken away, and then he was indefinitely suspended from his duty and got his pay taken away for disagreeing with their January 6th narrative. Ohio Congressman Jim Jordan, ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee, joins me now. Congressman, now this specific FBI employee I mentioned, what can you tell us more about him or her?
Decorated Iraqi war veteran being run out of the FBI. His allegiance to the country is being questioned because he had the gall to say something that offended the FBI leadership about the January 6th investigation. The other one is also having the same thing happen to them simply because on an anonymous questionnaire they said something that the leadership disagreed with them about January 6th. And I would point out, Laura, that we now have had 6 agents come forward as whistleblowers. 2 on the school board's narrative, on the school board's issue, and 4 now regarding January 6th. That is a concern to us, but we've had literally a half a dozen FBI agents come to our committee.
It's happening all over government, is it not, Jim? I mean, it's happening at the FBI. We know it's happening in our military with the whole stand-down order, remember, in the spring of 2021 after January 6th. So we have to make sure there are no, unsavory people in our military. That was a warning shot that they fired across the bow for our young military men and women, was it not?
Right, exactly. It's the weaponization of government against your political foes. The legacy, and to go with your monologue, the legacy of the Attorney General Garland right now is the school board's issue. Writing the memorandum that treats moms and dads as domestic terrorists. That's the legacy thus far in his tenure as Attorney General. But this weaponization of government against your political foes is exactly what's going on. So much so we had the Disinformation Governance Board, and but for your efforts and others pointing this out, that still might be in operation. That is how the left is operating. In the context here with the FBI, remember, a few years ago, they spied on President Trump. Then it was the actions they took against parents regarding the school board situation. And then 2 whistleblowers last month had come forward who attended the January 6th rally on their own time with their spouse, didn't go in the Capitol, haven't been charged, but they've had their security clearance taken from them too, which is always the first step in termination. Again, one of those individuals was also a veteran of our armed forces. This is happening, and it is as wrong can be.
Now, Congressman, on the issue of Jan 6, here's the CNN reporter Ryan Nobles with, I thought, what was a stunning admission. Watch.
It's largely going to be a controlled message, even though there are Republicans on the panel. These Republicans and Democrats are working in unison. That means there's going to be no opposition voices during these hearings.
I mean, that is laugh out loud hilarious, Jim. I mean, this is theater, and they're upset that we're not running it live on Fox. It's their theater. It's their production. It's their props, their wardrobe, their makeup, whatever the hell they're doing. It's all on them. That's what they wanted.
And and they've used taxpayer money to hire the former president of ABC News to choreograph the documentary that they're going to present on Thursday night and over the coming weeks. So, yeah, this is exactly what it is. Choreographed, brought to you by the taxpayer at taxpayer expense.
Do we know how much it's costing, by the way, Congressman? We have mothers who can't find baby formula. All right, we have people struggling to put fuel in their gas tanks. How much is this costing, this little show?
I don't know, but I do know you're right. There will be no this is the only committee hearing I've ever seen in Congress where there was not an opportunity to cross-examine witnesses, because there is no Republican on that committee who will do it. So this is worse than what Adam Schiff did in the bunker in the basement with impeachment back in 2019. At least I got to be in that room and depose witnesses, and then when they had the hearings, we got to cross-examine witnesses. But in this situation, that's not even happening. So this is completely choreographed presentation, completely partisan. The good news is the American people have figured all that out.
Yeah, Kafka would be very proud. Congressman, great to see you.
And by the way, I don't want to see anything bad happen to Hunter Biden. Whatever it is the facts. But I don't want to see anything bad happen to Hunter Biden.
The scourge of anti-Semitism cannot be ignored, cannot be tolerated, and it cannot be allowed to continue. We can't allow it to continue. It must be confronted and condemned everywhere it rears its very ugly head. We must stand with our Jewish brothers and sisters to defeat anti-Semitism and vanquish the forces of hate. That's what it is. Through the centuries, the Jews have endured terrible persecution, and you know that. We've all read it, we've studied it. They've gone through a lot. And those seeking their destruction, we will seek their destruction.
I have saved you, cried the woman, and you've bitten me, heavens, why? You know your bite is poisonous, and now I'm going to die. Oh, shut up, silly woman, said the reptile with a grin. You knew damn well I was a snake before you took me in.
That's the way the Jews work. They are deceivers. They plot. They lie. They do whatever they have to do to accomplish their political agenda. Members of the U.S. military are going to have to take a stand because of this Jew coup in the United States. That's why I'm putting everything on the line, saying this is a coup led by Jews to overthrow the constitutionally elected president of the United States. And it's beyond removing Donald Trump. It's removing you and me. That's what's at the heart of it.
That's right.
You have been taken over by a Jewish cabal, a Bolshevik revolution, and I'm going to tell you, the Church of Jesus Christ, you're next. Get it through your head. They're coming for you. There will be a purge. That's the next thing that happens when Jews take over a country. They kill millions of Christians.
Who is Rome and so on? Who is Esav? Because Esav is not only a persecutory agent, but it's the greatest of all the persecutory agents, and it is the longest. You know, it's been around with us as not in the form of Rome, which I will mention, but it has been around for a long time, thousands of years. And therefore Esav is the greatest of the persecutory nations, and it is the longest. It all started, of course, with Esav. Esav became Edom, which is a nation. Edom became Rome. The Torah says Esav is Edom. The Gemara says, the Talmud says, that Edom is Rome, Zuroimi. Okay. But what's interesting, of course, is that God decided that he doesn't want a nation, or rather Rome, a nation to be the greatest persecutory agent for the Jews, because that would mean that until the Mashiach comes, Rome has to be the major dominant force or nation in the entire world. And God does not want that. As it is, Rome was, a nation for at least probably close to 1,000 years. And then the one in Constantinople went even another 1,000 years after that. So what God did, which is interesting, he changed the form of Esav. Instead of it being Rome, it became Christianity. The concept of Esav as Edom and as Rome was changed, transformed into a religion. So therefore, any nation that has that religion can be considered Esav. See? So therefore, it's not one nation that is now 2,000 years or whatever, but it is a religion, and any nation that has that religion predominantly is called Esav. And that's what happened, you see. So Christianity, of course, ultimately became Western civilization. So Esav today is really Western civilization.
The Rambam says that there are 3 mitzvahs that the Jewish people were commanded to do when they entered into the land of Israel. And they are, number 1, to establish a king for themselves. Number 2, ulahachriz zarei shel Amalek, and to cut off the offsprings of the nation of Amalek. And number 3,
cut off the offsprings. Abortion, trying all the propaganda in the media telling white people to not have kids. The idea that white kids and white people are just inherently racist, you wonder, where does all this anti-white propaganda come from?
The central bank will have absolute control on the rules and regulations that will determine the use of that expression of central bank liability. And also, we will have the technology to enforce that.
A mission of equity. Are you going to join the mission of equity? Can you define it? Lieutenant Colonel Matthew Lohmeyer can define it. He knows what that mission looks like. He was a commander in the Space Force. He was then fired for speaking out against the open political indoctrination that he saw there. He's the author of the book Irresistible Revolution, Marxism's Goal of Conquest and the Unmaking of the American Military. Colonel Lohmeyer joins us tonight. Lieutenant Colonel, thanks so much for coming on. So NASA, you would think, would be the one branch, agency, that would be immune from the equity mission. Were you, you've served in the U.S. government for a long time. Were you under the impression that NASA had a problem with discrimination in years past?
Yeah, I don't know, Tucker. Thanks, first off, for having me on your show. And as always, I don't speak for the Defense Department, but speak for myself. I don't think that any of our institutions at this point are immune from this idea that we're going to be pursuing equity. Clearly, these are hot topics, the talking point of the day. In fact, I do want to define it for the American people. You mentioned, I know the definition of equity. It's important for the American people to understand the difference between equity
and equality. One of them is good and the ideal, and the other is not good. We tend to confuse at the moment equality of opportunity, which is the ideal and is something that's a part of America's founding philosophy, with equity. It's a new term. It's used wittingly, which essentially means enforced outcomes or enforced inequality. In fact, based on what I've seen in the Department of Defense, and now what I'm hearing is permeating institutions across the country, it's essentially even potentially illegally discriminatory policy. Equity is not good as it is defined, but it sounds good, and that's why we use the word. But NASA has historically been, I think, a symbol of inclusion and equal opportunity.
Yes.
NASA is the kind of an organization that people can look at and understand that regardless of your background, you're able to show up here, just like in the Defense Department, and rise up based on your merit and have an opportunity to make a name for yourself, to rise to leadership, and actually do very important things for the country. Because there's a unifying mission that these institutions believe in, whether it's space exploration, in the case of NASA, or defending our country and our allies from serious threats that we have in the world. People in uniform, for example, rally around that mission and have historically not been caught up in the kind of identity politicking that you're talking about and that I'm hearing in your monologue. And so I'll just make one point to say that I think our senior leaders and our national leaders need to think very carefully about whether or not they want to inject tribalism into our long trusted institutions in this country that typically have not been infected with tribal thinking, with all that entails. Do we really want to walk the road that will cause us to abandon Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream of having a colorless society where, in fact, we're starting once again to judge people by the color of their skin, impugning guilt to other groups of people based on their group identity, not because of anything that they've ever done necessarily themselves, but based on who they are, accidentally even, let's say. That is a good definition of racism. We don't impugn guilt to people based on the color of their skin.
No, and we never should. And I always imagined that the military was the shining beacon of what the rest of the country should be, because it was a colorblind meritocracy in there. So I think this threatens all of us. Lieutenant Colonel
in
Wilmeyer.
fact, the military is great at that, Tucker, and that's why so many people are upset about what they're hearing.
Yeah, and they have every reason to be. I know that you are. Thank you. Thank you for speaking out and for coming on tonight.
Thank you.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.
That Space Force commander we've been telling you about over the last 2 weeks, fired for calling out critical race theory in the military, now warning against what he calls Marxist trends in America. Watch this.
You've got people standing in the streets with raised fists, demanding that others bow down and apologize for their privilege, apologize for what race or group they belong to. They shut down schools, all the while allowing people to gather in so-called peaceful protests. Everything that you see taking place in this country is playbook Marxism.
Author Douglas Murray joins us right now. Douglas, you know, the Secretary of Defense had said, I believe it was in February, if anybody in the military sees something out of place that does not belong in the military, speak up. He spoke up. He wrote a book. He was on a podcast. It hit the fan, and now he's out of that job.
Yeah. Well, we all know the game, don't we? You should speak up as long as you speak up saying exactly the right things of today's ideology. What the Air Force captain said was completely true. It's absolutely completely true. And at the very least is fair comment. What's amazing, of course, is that what he said is true, obvious to most Americans, and not politically palatable by so many people in charge of our major institutions today. It's a disgrace what's happened to him. Either you have the right to call out these insane behaviors or you don't. And he should have had the right, and it's been taken away from him.
It has been. And, you know, for the boss to say, hey, you see something, let us know. And he let people know. In his defense, he said, look, I wasn't trying to point out any political point of view. I'm not trying to point out any politician who's pushing critical race theory or anything like that. I'm just talking about what is happening with the rank and file militaries of members of the military are exhibiting in many cases. And it's Marxist. It's critical race theory. People should know about it. Well, now they know about it, but it's like, okay, you see something like that, don't speak up or you're going to get canned.
Yeah. Here's the thing. What keeps happening at the moment in America is highly political people make institutions highly politicized. Look at the CIA recently and its recent recruitment ads. They make these institutions highly political in one direction. Always now in the direction of critical race theory and all of the sub-Marxist junk that comes along with it. And so they politicize it. And then somebody comes along like this Air Force captain and says, I'm not really cool with this. This doesn't really seem to suit us. And they say, how dare you be political?
Right.
See, either you have a level playing field in which you can do your Marxist claptrap if you want, but you can also have to accept you're going to get some criticism for it. Or there's this weird, uneven playing field where it's all downhill and all favors the Marxist, junk Marxist, CRT version of everything. But I'm for not allowing these people to have a free ride. The Air Force captain who's just been fired is also not for allowing these people to have a free ride. But the whole game at the moment is rigged. It's all rigged against anyone who calls this stuff out, but people should call it out. The Air Force captain may have been fired, but he should be honored by ordinary Americans.
But because he works in the Biden administration, if you criticize critical race theory, you know, people will know about your feelings about what is going on. But then again, during the Biden administration, there's a real good chance you're going to lose your job, your government job.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Well, as I say, these people are rewriting everything. The whole critical race theory thing is about rewriting everything in American history, pretending that all institutions have to follow this new, totally revolutionary way of looking at things. They do all of that, and they then, in addition, the cherry on the cake is they expect nobody to point it out. Well, people should point it out. We've got to point it out. We just can't be silent. And I just think we should honor everyone who is not silent in the face of this revolutionary fervor.
Well, the Air Force Inspector General is doing an investigation to see if it was partisan or political. As soon as that result is known, we will share it with the audience. Douglas, thank you very much for joining us today.
It's a great pleasure.
Our pleasure as well.
The QAnon movement really is a movement that spun out of your digital soldiers. I'm tired of these QAnon people attacking me.
Maybe, I don't know that.
But you know some of them.
I think it's a disinformation campaign. I think it's a disinformation campaign that the CIA created. That's what I believe. Now, I don't know that for a fact, but that's what I think it is. I think it's a disinformation campaign. It's actually a very interesting article today out that was sent to me. I'll send it to you about how the QAnon movement has failed and all that. But I find it total nonsense, and I think it's a disinformation campaign created by the left, and the types of people that can create something like that are the kinds of people that we train for certain with certain skills in the CIA.
I'm aware that the CIA does it.
I wouldn't be surprised if that's what it was.
Yeah.